Good afternoon and welcome back, ladies, gents and Pikachus, to another analysis and breakdown of the Quran of the Muslims. Yes, we'll be breaking it down again verse by verse into factual, logical statements in English so that we can understand who or what is Allah, what does he mean by this book, and how does this affect us as non-believers in our lives today. So, this morning we went through some quite horrific stuff, really. Verse 15 to 21 of Al-NIISA, the Book of Women in Islam. And I have to say, it was one of the less joyful experiences of my life having to film that. I really didn't enjoy it very much at all. And I don't suppose many people would have enjoyed watching it. And subsequently, it didn't do very well. So I'm going to try and make this one a little bit more fun, throw a little bit more humour in there. But don't take anything away from how absolutely deplorable and disgusting Islam is when it comes to the treatment of women. So rather than me just tell you about it and use the Quran as a source, which is what we usually do, instead of that, we're going to look through some more news sites and stuff from Muslim countries to see how they're putting this into practice today. So, let's get started. Before we look at the news, I just want to remind you that even though the official governments of the Muslim countries generally will claim that prostitution is illegal, and if a prostitute is caught, they shall be executed. If anyone's caught making people prostitutes or making money off them, they're also executed. But this isn't exactly what it says in the Quran. What it says in the Quran is you can take these women in your right hand and use them as prostitutes within the community to make yourself an abundance of money, as long as you give most of that money back to the mosque and it finds its way into the grubby little hands of Allah. That's the letter of the law in the Quran of the Muslims. So even though the governments will claim to us Westerners that's exactly the opposite of what they do, we will now have a look at some of the evidence to see which one of these is correct. The government line that they give the West, or the Arabic Quran which they give their preachers. So, let's start off looking at some news. So, we start off with the Iranian Press Company, which is a sponsored journalism outlet, sponsored by the Iranian government. So, keep in mind, it might be propaganda. There's definitely propaganda in here, because it's the Iranian government promoting their hate for the Saudi government. But the important things to remember are the Saudi government are Sunnis and the Iranian government are Shia Alawites. You know, they're a splinter faction kind of thing. So they're at war with each other. And the reason they're trying to destroy each other's reputation is so that they can, when the caliphate is formed, be the guys to take control of it. So anyway, we can see in the background here some prostitutes, some Muslim prostitutes, and their leader's got a nice big handbag. And then on the right-hand side, the non-covered ones are the wives of the prosecution. A top opposition figure revealed today in the company of Saudi Arabia was supporting the dissemination of prostitutes in the Muslim country. Syed Faqih, the leader of the AL-NIISA Islamic movement in Saudi Arabia, elaborated on the quasi-formal prostitution that is going on in the country. The ruling system prosecutes reformists for just a simple tweet, but it ignores open prostitution with the names and photos of these prostitutes in the holy Mecca, he noted. So what they're saying here, and what is more important, right, is if we read down, every year at the time of the Hajj pilgrimage, thousands of Muslims congregate to perform the Islamic rituals in Mecca, a place that is known as the epicenter of Islamic Ummah. That's the pilgrimage. Since taking power in Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman has jailed many of his opponents, including religious figures, and promoted Western culture. So what they're saying is prostitution and the other illegitimate sexual relations, including homosexuality, is the fault of Western society's influence. In other words, it's a part of our culture and something that is not seen in Islamic culture. So that's what they're trying to say here. They're trying to blame it on the West. So isn't that just an interesting thing, how even though they claim that the prostitution is against the law and they're prosecuting the prostitutes, so they're not prosecuting the government minister who they just claimed was actually enabling this and organising it, they're only prosecuting the women. In the courtroom, there are the prosecution there with their wives and they're acting all kind of hoity-toity like it's not their problem. And the entire point of doing this is so that they can blame Western influence. That's what they're going to do during that courtroom. They're going to say these women have been tricked by Westerners into prostitution, and that's why it is not the fault of the religious figures who are in the government, who have organised it. So I think that is the first bit of evidence we need to remember, is even though the government are claiming to us here in the West that prostitution's illegal, they're actually only claiming that it exists so that they can have a go at Westerners and say it's the influence of Western culture. But I would like to remind you that just recently we had a huge boxing tournament in Saudi Arabia sponsored directly by King bin Salman. I can't remember what his name is, that guy. And that was like millions of pounds. So, and it was a huge tournament with boxing, drinking and gambling. 3 things which are supposed to be illegal within Islam, which the people on the ground level can't do and will be highly, they will be prosecuted and sometimes executed if they're caught doing those things. But at the top level, it seems like they don't have the same rules. It's almost like communism, where everyone on the ground level is expected to follow all of the rules all of the time. But the guys at the top are more equal than others. They don't have to follow the rules that they're making and they're enforcing. In fact, they don't have to do anything. And it seems like when they do something, i.e. when they organise rings of prostitution to make money off, and they're caught, they can just have the prostitutes take the fall for it and blame it on the West. So their names are kept clean, in the tradition of preaching up the religion and covering the sins of your brothers. And I feel like that's exactly what we're seeing here. Unfortunately for them, though, it seems in other places like Africa and Gambia, Hamat Bar, who works for the government there, says that there's prostitution everywhere, including Mecca and Rome. And I think it's important to realise why Mecca and Rome are being put in the same sentence there. Because in the eyes of the Islamic preachers, Mecca and Rome are supposed to be the holy sites where there's none of this stuff happening. But as we can see from the Mamadou Justice Darbo article, that is not the case, as he writes. The Minister of Tourism and Culture has said that sex tourism is not only unique to the Gambia, as prostitution also exists both in Rome and in Mecca. Yes, prostitution is all over the world. You go to Rome, it's there. You go to Mecca, and it's there. It's everywhere. It's the oldest profession, writes Hamat Ba. And he told his journalists this at a press conference in the Gambia Tourism and Hospitality Institute in Kanifing on Friday. There are claims of sex tourism in the Gambia, and Barr, addressing the issue, said it was a section of the Gambian media who were peddling such claims. So again, they're trying to blame it on someone else. There is no sex tourism in Gambia. Sex tourism is something that the government sanctions, that is well organised, that is well managed, and is not in this country. So he's actually saying, even though previously they were trying to blame it on the West, he's saying it's coming from Mecca and Rome. So when I see journalists writing in Gambia about sex tourism, you take them to court, they will lose the case. So he's saying there the government won't allow the journalists to write what they write. And he's saying at the end, let's be cautious of what we write. So there's a threat there from the government against anyone who does the journalism. And then it says at the bottom here, the search for missing Gambians yields no result. So, hopefully you've started to recognise there is a trend developing here with these stories. And the trend is that Westerners are being blamed for the influence. The Western culture is having to carry the can for homosexuality, prostitution, dirty, disgusting behaviours as they're described in the press in Gambia, in Mecca and in Rome as well. Even though they actually said twice, once in both articles, that it's government sanctioned and organised, it's organised by the government, and the only people who are actually going to be prosecuted are women. There's not a single man that has been prosecuted there. And the punishment for these prosecutions is lashes, 100 lashes, which is a really quite a severe punishment, or execution. So what we can tell from this is, as we know from this book here, the Quran of the Muslims, the only reason these things are being prosecuted at all is so they can escape criticism from Christians, Jews and atheists in the West and the secular world. And the people in the government who have organised and sanctioned this, they're not going to get prosecuted at all. In fact, they have been completely hidden away. We don't even get to know what their names or their faces are. Apart from Mohammed bin Salman, who is the king of Saudi Arabia. And he was only mentioned by a rival religious faction who would like very much to see him deposed and probably executed. So my point to you, ladies, gents and Pikachus, is this. How can we trust these guys here when they're over in our country, when they cannot even trust each other in their own countries? And further to that, they blame us here for the problems they have there, despite the fact that it's their own governments who are organising and making this happen. And then when they get caught, even though it's the Westerners' fault, that's what they said. They said it was Westerners' fault. It's Rome, it's the Western culture. The only people being punished are the female prostitutes themselves. And I'm sure I don't need to tell you, the large majority of these women in Islamic countries have had female circumcisions at birth. And what that means is there's 0% chance they will ever feel any sexual pleasure in their lives. It's impossible for them. Physically, they are not able to. So it seems strange to me that they would be choosing a life of prostitution when there's no fun in it. They don't get to keep any of the money. And they are going to be executed for it in public. So there's no benefit whatsoever, even a speculative one. And instead, the benefit is going to the guys in the top of the culture, you know, the religious imams and the government figures who are not named directly, apart from poor old King Salman. So, one more article we can look at, and then I think we will summarise and we'll go through where this is all leading us in terms of Muslims and the Quran of the Muslims. And finally, we look at a Neraland, which is Nigerian news forum with 3.5 million members. So quite a few people on this, and it was just updated a few hours ago. So we look at the trafficking in Nigeria. Trafficking, how Northerners are turning Mecca into prostitution and crime havens, by Bashir 4, 2011. A response to a cyborg who claims only Igbos are bringing shame to Nigeria. That means foreigners. While thousands of Muslim faithfuls from Nigeria travel to Saudi Arabia for their pilgrimage and returned home after the rites, many female pilgrims would abscond with the assistance of travel agents to live as illegal migrants, preferably referred to as tikari, engaging in all sorts of businesses to make quick money. Mustafa Izakwaru witnessed their activities while on the pilgrimage to Hajj and reports. Saudi Arabia has become one country where human trafficking is thriving, with the influx of Nigerian women, men and also youths, mainly from the northern part of the country, with a view to earning a living through various means. Even married women are also being lured to the Holy Land with promises of juicy jobs and profitable businesses. The married women would therefore break up their marriages and relocate to Mecca in search of greener pastures. However, on reaching there, they were made to engage in forced labour in the residence of Arabs, where they worked as domestic servants, beggars, roadside hawkers, or indulge in other unwholesome activities. They are also alleged to engage in prostitution. While some of the married women gave up their marriage deliberately, others do so with the permission of the husbands, who would allow them to work in Saudi Arabia to make money. Reports indicate that the Sharia law system is taking decisive measures against those men for aiding and abetting such acts, making others have a rethink on the issue. So there's two important factors that I want to consider there. The first is how organised this prostitution is and how it actually is said to involve people's wives, youths, and this is in Nigeria. This is not in Mecca. This is quite a, it's a nearby country in terms of us, but it isn't actually nearby in terms of amount of miles. Nigeria and Mecca are quite far away from each other. And they said at the end that the Sharia people are there in Nigeria, trying to catch up with these Arab Muslim guys who are selling their wives into prostitution. So that tells us that the Sharia police are everywhere. They don't just confine themselves to their own jurisdictions, if you like. They will go wherever there are Muslims. So that's the first thing. The Sharia police are everywhere, all over the world. And the second thing is the Nigerians are not actually Muslims by their government. They have their own system. So even though there's a lot of Muslims there, they're not bound by the government to blame the West. So who did they blame? They blamed the Arabs. And they said it was coming out of Mecca directly. So whereas Mecca, Saudi Arabia and Jordan, these places, they are quite happy to blame the West and put the prostitutes on the stand and then prosecute them alone, when it comes to Gambia and Nigeria, which are not specifically Muslim countries, they are actually blaming Mecca directly and the people in the governments of those countries. So as we can see, because they are restricted by the rules that Allah sets forth in this book here, the Quran of the Muslim countries take no responsibility for their own actions. Not only do they take no responsibility, they punish the women directly, even though they are slaves. They will punish the slaves so that there doesn't have to be any punishment for them. And when this is being spoken about in the press, they will try to stop that from happening. They try and repress any reporting and journalism. But if any is to occur, they directly blame it on their enemies in the West, Christians and Jews. So I think the thing to remember here is, as we read more into our Quran and we read about the horrible, indecent behaviour of these sinful, awful women and the punishments they quite rightly are going to receive in the words of Allah, it's worth keeping in mind. These are slaves, and they knew when they were writing this book, Allah knows, if he's real, that these slaves are not responsible for any of these actions, and they don't deserve to be punished like this at all. In fact, they probably deserve to be set free and rewarded for having survived such a horrific experience. But that just isn't what we see. We see the opposite. As we know about the Muslim culture, it's very concerned with blaming the Westerner, blaming the infidel for all their problems, and then back home praising up the religion, covering up the sins of their brothers, and punishing women. And that's the point I want to end this video on. We cannot stand by and allow this disgusting, deplorable cult that hates women, and also young boys, and the West in general, we cannot allow them to come here to our country if all they're going to do is claim that they're on an equal footing with us, they're just as peaceful and nice, and they're equal with Jews and Christians and any other, secular group within society. But at the same time as that, they totally ignore our laws, and they totally blame their sin and their crime on us and say it's our culture that's at fault. Then when they go back to their own country, they do the same. They tell their people in their country that we are infidels and it's our disgusting natures. It's our culture that has caused this. And they use this to rile up hateful sentiments against us in foreign countries. But we can also see there's a good thing to come out of this. And that is other countries, Nigeria and Gambia, these are countries full of brave people who can see that this is not the case. And they are actually saying, no, it's not actually Westerners who are at fault here. It's not our government who's at fault here. It's Mecca. That's who they blamed. Gambia and Nigeria. In both the articles we looked at, they both directly blamed government officials in Mecca who are high up in the Muslim religious, they're like high up imams. And that's the thing to take away from this is we need to start putting our foot down here, ladies, gents and Pikachus, and making sure we administrate and we run our country in the correct way that we have been doing. We're not allowing these guys to influence us, considering that they are not honest and they have bad intentions for us. They wish to blame their country's problems on us here so that when they kill us, we're just disgusting infidels who deserved it. And not only that, they can continue covering up their crimes and preaching up their religion, making it sound better than it really is. And the net result is going to be the women suffer. And we cannot allow that to happen. If Nigeria and Gambian people if they have the courage to fight this in their countries, then why shouldn't we? And we should not be afraid of being called racist or Islamophobic. None of these things are real. None of these things are actually happening. Like me, for instance, I get called this on a daily basis. I am not racist or Islamophobic. What I am is directly against the abuse and oppression of women, sexual slavery, and omitting responsibility so that you can blame it on another country and people with the intent of wiping them out at a later stage. That's what I'm against. And that's where we're going to end this video. So hopefully you enjoyed that and you learnt something. God bless you all, and I will see you tomorrow morning at 7:15 AM. Until then, have a lovely evening, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye now. And so we reach the end of another day of Without Lies, Islam Dies. And if you know of any good psychologists, please send them in my direction, because I need medical help at this point. So anyway, that's all for now. See you tomorrow. God bless. Have a good evening, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye now. Bye-bye.